Hi, this is Denise from Denise in Wonderland, a magical journey of faith through Christ. Today, we will sink deeper into God's Word and His truth. We have to chase the presence of God, and we can do so through His Word. Let's get started. Genesis chapter 26. There was a famine in the land, besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, to Gerar. Yahweh appeared to him and said, "Don't go down into Egypt. Live in the land I will tell you about. Live in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For I will give to you and to your offspring all these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the sky, and will give all these lands to your offspring. In your offspring will all the nations of the earth be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my requirements, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." Isaac lived in Gerar. The men of the place asked him about his wife. He said, "She is my sister," for he was afraid to say, "My wife," lest he thought the men of the place might kill me for Rebekah, because she is beautiful to look at. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out at a window and saw, and behold, Isaac was caressing Rebekah, his wife. Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Behold, surely she's your wife. Why did you say, 'She is my sister'?" Isaac said to him, "Because I said, 'Lest I die because of her.'" Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt on us." Abimelech commanded all the people, saying, "He who touches this man or his wife will surely be put to death." Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100 times what he planted. Yahweh blessed him. The man grew great and grew more and more until he became very great. He had possessions of flocks, possessions of herds, and a great household. The Philistines envied him. Now all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth. Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go from us, for you are much mightier than we." Isaac departed from there, encamped in the valley of Gerar, and lived there. Isaac dug again the wells of water, which they had dug in the days of Abraham his father. For the Philistines had stopped them after the death of Abraham. He called their names after the names by which his father had called them. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of springing water. The herdsmen of Gerar argued with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." He called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. They dug another well, and they argued over that also. He called its name Sitnah. He left that place and dug another well. They didn't argue over that one. He called it Rehoboth. He said, "For now Yahweh has made room for us, and we will be fruitful in the land." He went up from there to Beersheba. Yahweh appeared to him the same night and said, "I am the God of Abraham your father. Don't be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake." He built an altar there and called on Yahweh's name and pitched his tent there. There Isaac's servants dug a well. Then Abimelech went to him from Gerar, and Ahuzzath his friend, and Phicol the captain of his army. Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, since you hate me and have sent me away from you?" They said, "We saw plainly that Yahweh was with you. We said, 'Let there now be an oath between us, even between us and you, and let us make a covenant with you that you will do us no harm, as we have not touched you, and as we have done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of Yahweh.'" He made them a feast, and they ate and drank. They rose up sometime in the morning and swore to one another. Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. The same day Isaac's servants came and told him concerning the well which they had dug, and said to him, "We have found water." He called it Sheba. Therefore the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. When Esau was 40 years old, he took his wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri, the Hittite, and Basemath the daughter of Elon the Hittite. They grieved Isaac's and Rebekah's spirits. Okay, so this is chapter 26 of Genesis. We have here a famine. And Isaac, remember, Abraham is gone now, and Isaac is still living by himself. So, because he did not return home, but he's married to Rebekah. They have two sons, Jacob and Esau. So, we have, when this famine arrives, as with any famine, as when something's missing, especially for those of you who may have experienced a local area where all of a sudden toilet paper or whatever was missing, you do the next best thing. Once you realize that something is gone and there's not going to be any food there, you're going to go to wherever there's something available. And so that's what Isaac's natural reaction is to do. He's like, well, hey, Egypt is a Mecca back then. So, it makes sense to go to Egypt so that way you can at least get a chance at getting some food. But God specifically intervenes and tells him, no, it's not meant to be for him to go. But he encourages. See, I love what God will do. And he doesn't have to do this because we should just listen. But he understands how frail we are as human beings. And so a lot of times he will say, no, don't do something. But then he'll say, don't worry, or he'll say something along those lines, because he says, don't go down into Egypt. Live in the land I will tell you about. Live in this land and I will be with you. That's encouragement. He says, I will be with you and will bless you, for I will give to you and to your offspring all these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. And then God continues on. Of course, he does say that all this stuff was possible even for his father, because his father obeyed God's voice and kept his requirements and his statutes. So this is important, because what God is telling Isaac is, he's like, look, you know that your father became very wealthy doing all these things. All these things were possible because I made a covenant with your father. So even though you see a famine right now, if you mimic what your father did, if you do the same, if you follow me, if you listen to my voice, I will do the same thing with you that I did with your father. And this is good because, remember, Abraham, when he left, he didn't know what was going to be the end result. He did not know where he was going when he left his father's house. So he didn't know if he was going to end up in a place where there was nothing. So Isaac actually has the benefit of being able to recall that his father was blessed, and he did these things just because of God. So that's where he's at right now. And then we have Isaac, unfortunately, repeat the sin of his father. And this is very important for us to remember. Regardless of our faith in God, we can be susceptible to repeating some of the sins, the errors of our previous ancestors. And that is why it's so important for us to constantly be in God's presence, because even these people who walked with God, we get to see, the Bible allows us to see how these people fail sometimes, and that God is still merciful, but it is unfortunate that, they fall a little bit. So we have here Isaac, he lies. He says Rebekah is his sister, not his wife, because he's fearful. And again, this is a sin, because if he stays silent, then he risks, someone taking his wife as a wife and basically committing adultery, and his poor wife's going to end up somebody else's wife. But God intervenes. This is nothing but God, because God makes sure that Abimelech, the king, sees Isaac caressing. I'm just trying to find the verse. I believe it's in verse 8, caressing Rebecca. And then he just knows, oh gosh, he's like, that's not your sister. That's your wife, isn't she? And just to make this clear, this King Abimelech most likely is not the Abimelech from earlier. This is probably just a title. Probably the Philistine kings, they probably all assume kind of a similar name. So they have a very similar naming conventions for their kings. So this is not the same king, but we're seeing the same story play out. And he sees it, and then he's like, Abimelech's like, he's like, hey, do you realize what you could have done? Because if you're blessed, if you're saying that you're walking with Yahweh, then if we did this to you, whether we're aware of it or not, we're going to be cursed. I mean, this is horrible, you know. And then we're basically committing some poor deed towards you, and we don't even know because you're the one that created this situation. And so Abimelech commands all his people and says, under no circumstances is anyone supposed to touch Isaac or Rebekah. And so that kind of puts that matter, that finalizes that. But then Isaac, he starts to really work, and everyone begins to recognize how he actually reaps 100 times more than what he plants. And so it creates a little bit of jealousy among the Philistines. So then they want him out. So what they do is, this is apparently an ancient practice that you use sometimes in war. They fill in the wells that the father Abraham had dug many, many years before. And see, by filling in those wells, then really Isaac wouldn't have any right to them. And also Isaac wouldn't want them anymore, because once they've been filled up with dirt, they're useless to him. And so they're using this as a way of pushing him out and getting him out of there, because they'll say, well, you've got useless wells now. And so he does leave. He leaves, but even though he leaves, where does he go? He goes to the Valley of Gerar. So he goes a little ways away, and what I think is a spiritual concept for us to recognize is, even though we may build ourselves up, because obviously he became very successful. He had these wells. He's producing 100-fold. But what ends up happening is all of that is brought to a screeching halt, and he's forced to now go to a valley. So sometimes we can feel like we're at a certain level in life, and we think, God, thank you, things are going well. And then something happens that brings us to a valley in our lives. And that's what happens. But even though we may fall to a valley, we have to continue to work. We can't be discouraged because we feel like we're starting all over again. And you're like, but I've already done this, God. I don't want to do this all over again. I want to reinvent my life. I don't want to go back to college. I don't want to get a new job. I don't want to, sometimes it's okay. So sometimes when you go to that valley, you've got to work, because we will see here what happens with patience as well as dependency on God. So he starts building. And as soon as he starts trying to build these, trying to dig these wells of water. This is in verse 18. See, these are previous wells that his father had dug all the time. Because remember, Abraham traveled a lot. So he's trying to kind of make these wells functional again. And so as soon as he's able to dig out a well, get it working, then the first well, the herdsmen of Gerar, they basically follow him down there. They watch him, and then they let him do all this work, and then they sweep in and say, oh no, that's ours. So basically they take credit, if we want to put it in our modern terms, they take credit for all the work that he did. They didn't interfere, they didn't volunteer. And, Isaac was just minding his own business, but they have to, they just can't leave this man alone. So then they take credit for, and they're like, it's ours. But Isaac, because he works for God, he's quiet, and he just moves to the next spot. So he moves to another well, another former well that his father had dug. And so he clears that out, gets that well functional again. And again, they say, nope, that's our well. And so At this point, a lot of us would have said, you know what, enough's enough, whatever. I'm leaving. I'm going to Egypt. But instead, Isaac's like, okay, he goes to the third well. And this one is called Rehoboth. And when he digs through that one, clears it, gets it working, he receives no one bothers him this time. And so that's why he calls it Rehoboth. Rehoboth means like a broad white space, or I was also reading room, and he even says that he called it Rehoboth, for now Yahweh has made room for us and we will be fruitful in the land. It's like, so God, even though he's in like this, not just a foreign territory, but he's in a hostile environment right now, but God carved out a place of peace for him. And he just had to find it. And so now he's there, he's settled. But it's not enough. So it says he went up from there to Beersheba. So this is verse 23. This is important. Remember, I said he was in the valley. Just as quickly as he was in the valley, he's already moving right back up. And he goes to Beersheba, and this is a place that Abraham resided earlier in life as well. And so we see him starting to already and he actually moves back closer to where these Philistines are. So, he could be putting himself at risk. But you know what? I think he got some confidence with that third well. So he goes up to Beersheba, and then God speaks to him and he says, I am the God of Abraham, your father. Don't be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. And I want you to realize when God says, don't be afraid, he says that to us a lot. Sometimes we will withdraw from places that God wants us to be because we're afraid. But God's like, don't be. He's like, for I'm with you. And if I'm with you, don't let fear reside there, because the God of Abraham, and sometimes we might need to say that, the God of Abraham, the God who is the father of Jesus Christ, the God who resurrected Jesus Christ is with me. And so in this spot, Isaac builds an altar and he calls on Yahweh's name. He pitches his tent there and they dig another well. So now they're digging a new well. And see, isn't that wonderful? He goes from the used stuff, but now he digs a brand new well. And some people would say that's risky, because it's like, you really want to put all this work into building a brand new well this close to those Philistines? They may come over there and sweep and take that again. So he digs the well. But what's interesting is all of a sudden Abimelech, he decides to approach. He pays a visit to Isaac. And I think it's interesting because if you think about it, Abimelech has allowed this bullying to continue. I mean, they bullied him when he was there, drove him the first time from multiple wells when they filled it in. And then he does all this work and he leaves. They're like, leave us. And so he does exactly what they say. And even though he did exactly what they said, that just was not enough. They bullied him when he filled up, when he cleared one well. They bullied him when he cleared up the second well. He got a third well working. And then now he just built a new one. And it's interesting that now they're approaching him. And I'll tell you why. They are seeing Isaac thrive. And they're wondering, we have put this man through some craziness. We have bullied him. We have definitely tried to put some fear in him. We've been awful to him. And he's continuing to thrive. See, remember, all this started because it wasn't just because he was growing great. It was just pure jealousy. And so they're still saying, well, what we tried didn't work. And see, this is what will happen. Sometimes people become fearful by your silence and your continued work. If you continue to do the work of God, sometimes even when you receive opposition, resistance, or ridicule, if you keep moving, you keep going, sometimes it might put some fear in the naysayers, because they're wondering, they know that if someone had did stuff to them, they would have said something, they would have reacted. And so they're seeing you thrive. They're like, oh gosh, this person's really successful. And these people know that he claims that Isaac claims that Yahweh is the one who is providing these blessings. So they're like, if he's got a God that's helping him, and we've tried everything, and he's still thriving, we better go make things right with him. Because I think they started to. It's crazy. They were trying so hard to put fear in him, and all that ended up happening is they ended up putting fear in themselves, because now they're approaching him because they don't understand him. So they're probably like, hey, I want to read this because it's actually funny when you read it out loud. Because Isaac's like, well, why have you come to me since you hate me and you sent me away from you? He's like, what are you guys doing here? Like, what do you want? And so then they say, well, we saw plainly that Yahweh was with you. We said, let there now be an oath between us, even between us and you, and let us make a covenant with you. So now they're like, hey, we see that God's with you. And we were thinking, it might be nice to like try to form an alliance now, so that way. And then they say that you will do us no harm as we have not touched you. Because they're basically saying, hey, we haven't touched you. We haven't harmed you. We've done nothing but good. Now, I will say it's a stretch. They've done nothing but good, but they're trying to butter Isaac up basically. And they're like, hey, if we make this, they're not saying making this oath to try to say they're not going to hurt him. They want this oath because they want to get some kind of assurances that he is not going to inflict some kind of vengeance upon them. And so that's why, that's why they're like, hey. But what's great is we see here the character of Isaac come out, because he forgives them, because he actually makes them a feast, and he goes ahead and does the alliance and the oath. And really, to be honest with you, he doesn't have to do the oath, but this is important for us to realize too, that sometimes when we feel like we're living in a hostile territory, as much as possible, as long as it does not compromise the values and the principles and the laws of God, as long as we don't compromise it, as much as possible, we should try to strive for peace with our neighbors, with the other people. Doesn't mean we allow, because Isaac did make it clear, hey, you guys don't like it. So Isaac was not going to tell a fib to them, but he did forgive them. And forgiveness is a good thing. It helps us. And hey, who wants to live in an environment of chaos? You want to live in an environment of peace. But we see this nice ending in this chapter. Now we do have something where it seems like it's kind of out of the way. In verse 34, we have a reference to Isaac's son, the twin, the one that was born a minute first. Esau, it says when he was 40, he basically married a local, and it grieves the parents because, and again, this is just reconfirming that Esau is just not the child of promise. He's not the son that God is going to be with. It's quite obvious, and it's not that God doesn't want to. It's Esau himself, because he is rejecting all of the principles that his father lived under, as well as his grandfather. That he knows about Yahweh, and he definitely knows the long story. He's probably heard it 1,000 times of about the oath that Abraham made his servant do to then find Rebecca, to find this godly woman. So this woman that God himself selected. So he knows, but he just goes out, he just finds anybody. He didn't even consult Yahweh. He didn't consult his father. So this shows that he's not someone that is going to be consulting Yahweh in anything. So this is important for us to see. So they're not just grieving because Esau married this girl. They're grieving because they are starting to see that one of their sons, Esau, is probably not going to walk with God. And if you don't walk with God, things don't always go well with you in the earth. I mean, things may not always go well with you when you follow God, but you can always be encouraged that God can restore you and that God will bring you peace and joy no matter what circumstances you're living under. So this is an interesting ending, but I will close right there. And just remember, I want you to be encouraged by there will be times that you feel like you're just getting pushed around, bullied around, and you feel like you're starting all over again. You're stuck in the valley. It's okay. Um, it may not be okay if you're being bullied or not, but sometimes you can get peace where God will teach you how to deal with those types of situations. The Bible is so important because it shows us that there are so many different types of environments we may get thrust in, that we have to learn how to live in it. And God wants us to understand that even though you may think you lost something, sometimes we're not perceiving it correctly. See, what ended up where Isaac was initially was not the best place for him. And so you have to think it's a blessing that God actually worked through these Philistines to kick him out, because now he got to establish a new place that was a little distant from them. And he actually ended up being able to get them to form an oath with him so that way they would leave him alone. Because see, remember when Abraham was alive, those were probably different people that ran the area. And so Abraham had oaths with those people. But see, people have amnesia. Once you have a new set of people that come in, then all of a sudden they're functioning differently. They're like, oh no, they're like, these are ours. So we have to see the blessing in this, that even though he was expelled, even though he was bullied, even though he went to a valley, he eventually got to rise up. God blessed him immensely. And God also shifted things around so that way there would be some kind of oath between Isaac and the people, that neither side would bother the other, but more importantly, they wouldn't bother Isaac. So this is really important for us to understand that sometimes things don't look like we think they look. So sometimes we may think something is a horrible thing. We may think that we're being delayed, but sometimes you're not being delayed. God is actually bringing you to a rest stop that gets you to the place that's much higher than where you were before. And I want to let that sink into your spirit, that sometimes God will actually bring you low so that way he can eventually propel you to a place that's higher than the place you've ever been before. And that is the way that God works. Those are divine protocols. That is the way it works in the Bible. We're going to flash forward a little bit. I know I always say I'm going to close and then I end up talking for 10 more minutes. But think about Joseph, and we will talk about this in more detail. When the brothers thought, they thought they were going to kill him. They decided not to kill him. So then they decided to leave him. He ended up being sold as a slave. Joseph, not only was he sold as a slave, but then he had a point where he got out, and then he was falsely accused of something, and then he was imprisoned. So now he's not a slave, he's imprisoned. And so you would think, oh my gosh, how much lower can Joseph go? He went from being the father of his, being a leader in his father's house, to being a slave. And then boom, now he's imprisoned. And then all of a sudden he ends up working directly for the Pharaoh. And we will talk about this phrase about how Joseph says that God reweaved basically the evil that was being done for their good. And that is what God does. So even though you may say, well, I don't know how it's God because so-and-so did this, you just don't know what God will use in order to bless you, to rework you and get you to reroute you to where you need to go. It's like a GPS where sometimes you look at there, you see the big red line and you're like, oh gosh. So if you're on a map, you're like, there's no way. You're like, this doesn't seem like a good path. So what do? You just make it right. And you trust that your GPS, whatever the name of your GPS is, you trust that it will reroute you and get you to the place that you need to go on a route that's better than the route that you were on before. But think of the trust involved when you do that. You're trusting in the system. You're trusting in this GPS, the cell phone, whatever it is. It's the same way with God, that even if you feel like you've been rerouted, move down into a valley, you've got to trust the GPS. You've got to trust, it's like a God positional system. You've got to trust that our God in heaven knows what he's doing and that whatever route he's taking you on, you're fine. Because a lot of times when we're rerouted on these GPS systems, a lot of times we've never been down those streets before. I mean, there have been times it's rerouted me. I'm like, I don't know what kind of street this is. I've never seen it before, but what do? You stay on it because the GPS told you and it said it's going to get you to where you need to go. So if God has told you he's going to get you to where you need to go, trust the process, trust the route, trust the path. So think about that throughout your day. And if you're driving, just when you look at these roads, just think there are tons of roads you drive by every day that you've never been down. But if that GPS ever rerouted you, you would take it in a heartbeat, even though you've never been down that road. And in the same way, you want God to know that if he wants to take you down roads you've never been before, trust him. Take that route. Don't delay. Don't delay. All right. You all have a wonderful, blessed day. Bye.